In Bootstrap, when building a layout to house the content of our site and give it structure, we are given two options to select from: a responsive fixed width container with gutters on the left and right side that changes at each responsive breakpoint, or a fluid width container that is 100% wide in the viewport at all times. They are created by giving a container element a class of container or container fluid. In my style sheet, I am going to give some styling to these two containers that I created in my HTML document, so visually we can see them in our browser. And since they don't have any content inside of them yet, I'm going to give them a fixed height and then surround them in a border to show the space they occupy in our screen. Take note of what happens when we preview this HTML document. Remembering that Bootstrap is a mobile-first framework, I will start my browser window below a pixel width of 576 pixels. Look how both containers start out on mobile devices to take up 100% the width of their viewport. Notice though that as I resize the browser window to a bigger size screen, that the container class element size changes to have gutters on its left and right side beyond a screen size of 576 pixels, whereas the container fluid element always keeps its 100% width. After we have our containers, we have to start our grid layout, which will be used to align our content with a nested div class of row. Then, nested inside of that row is the amount of columns that we want to occupy the created row. Right now, I just want to focus on the amount of columns that can go inside of a row, so ignore briefly the actual classification of columns used to break up our row, for we will go into this a little bit more later. Bootstrap is a 12-column grid system, which basically means that a row can occupy up to a count of 12 columns. Here, in each of these containers, I have created 12 columns to dissect my rows into. Okay, so now I'm going to go inside of my style sheet and add a little bit of styling to my columns so I can see how they are dissected inside of my rows, and then I'm going to preview my HTML document. This example here showcases the Bootstrap 12-column grid system. We can see individually how our content will be divided inside of a row if we had chose to have 12 individual containers. Let's go back and add an existing column count of 1 to an existing row and see what would happen. We are going to add this to our container fluid. Now this row will have a column count of 13. Let's save and preview and see how Bootstrap deals with this situation. A Bootstrap grid row cannot contain more than 12 columns. Therefore, Bootstrap automatically starts a new row for any columns that surpasses a total of 12 columns wide. I have deleted the element with the class of container from my page. I will just be working in the container fluid. Now that we understand the fact that Bootstrap is a 12-column grid system, let's see how we can take advantage of this system when laying out our web page and trying to align our content. A Bootstrap container can consist of as much rows as we want it to have. So notice that I have created a new div with a class of row. Nested within this row, I want to create two equal width columns that cover 50% of my screen. Look at the code that I am entering. I have created two divs with a class of col-6. Let's add some styling so we can see how these columns nested within our newly created row will act when we preview our document. Notice how our new row is split into two columns. Why? Well, following Bootstrap's 12-column grid, 12 divided by 6 is 2. By specifying the class col-6, I told Bootstrap just how many column counts I wanted each column to take up within our row. Let's look at another example. This time, I want to create within a new row 2 columns, one that is twice as big as the other. So I'm going to nest one div with a class of col-8 and another div with a class of col-4 inside of this row. Okay, in this style sheet, now I'm just going to add some styling so that we can see these columns and the space that they occupy on our screen. Just like in our first example, the columns here follow the directions to occupy the full length of our row. The only difference is that these two columns have one with a column count of 8 columns wide and the other with a column count of 4. Now, I'm going to delete this row and focus the next part on the row above it. I'm going to change the class names of these two divs slightly. Except for being col-6, let's change them to col-sm-6. Then we will go inside of our style sheet once again and add some styling. And after that, let's preview our document so we can see the effect this has. Remembering that Bootstrap is a mobile-first framework, I will resize the screen below 576 pixels and then gradually increase its size. Notice that on a screen size smaller than 576 pixels, these columns stack up on top of each other. But once they go beyond 576 pixels, they sit side by side inside of their row, occupying 6 columns count each. We have just added what is considered a responsive breakpoint. Responsive breakpoints for grid options are the rule for how our columns will act when they reach a specific screen size. Here are a list of Bootstrap's responsive breakpoints. A class of col by itself states that whatever combination of columns inside of a row that we specify, it will remain that way from an extra small screen and up to another specified breakpoint. Remembering that Bootstrap is a 12-column grid system and a mobile framework first, col-sm specifies that the amount of columns in a row will start out stacked on top of each other and then respond to be aligned by the amount of column count specified at a screen size of 576 pixels and up, or until another responsive breakpoint is specified. Similarly, col-md, col-lg, and col-xl specifies that the amount of columns in a row will start stacked up on top of each other and then respond to be aligned by the amount of column count specified at their designated screen size and or up until another responsive breakpoint is specified. This will allow us to dictate how our content will look on various different screen widths, giving us the opportunity to adjust our layout as we see fit by just applying varying classes. Let's look at an example. I'm going to create a row that has 3 columns and that responds at 3 different responsive breakpoints. At 576 pixels using SM, at 768 pixels using MD, and at 992 pixels using the LG responsive breakpoints. I'm just going to go into my style sheet and add some styling so visually we can see the effect of these various breakpoints. Once again, we will start our screen width below 576 pixels. Here, you will see as expected, each column stacked on top of each other. But once I reach a screen size higher than 576 pixels, the columns will take up an even 4 column counts each within the row. At a medium-sized screen, or 768 pixels, the middle column grows to take up 6 column counts, and the left and right column shrinks from 4 to 3 column counts each. And finally, using a responsive breakpoint LG, I am left with columns of 2, 8, and 2 column counts in their respective row. This is one of the things that makes Bootstrap so amazing. By adding these 3 different responsive breakpoint classes, I was able to align my content and make it respond in 4 different ways with very little code. I hope this example helps you guys out, and I hope that it helps you to understand Bootstrap a little bit more clearly. Take a look at this code here. This is what it would have took in order to create this responsive effect manually using media queries and Flexbox. Surely we can see the usefulness of Bootstrap now.